This is Beyond the Culture. Let's go. I'm so excited that you took the time to join us on the next episode of Beyond the Culture. This is the show where we embrace change and challenge cultural norms and ideals. I'm your host, Dr. David Walker. Today, I have an exciting show for you. I want to talk about a subject that seems to be in the news. It's the subject of mass incarceration and the criminal justice system. And I want to have a conversation about it. You know, there are some great books if you want to read on, mass incarceration, like The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, or recently I saw a phenomenal movie called Just Mercy, and it's talking about the life of attorney Brian Stevenson and how he fought for men in Alabama who were on death row and they were wrongly convicted. And so it was a great movie, so you got to see it. But I want to talk today about the incarceration of young men, and especially young men of color. So I have a guest today, and I've invited her on the show, and I want to have a conversation with my guest about the incarceration of young Black men. So my guest today is Dr. Jocelynne Rainey. Dr. Rainey is the president and CEO of Getting Out and Staying Out. That is a nonprofit organization which has helped over 10,000 formerly incarcerated and justice-involved young men achieve education, secure meaningful employment, and acquire emotional well-being. So I'm excited to have Jocelyn on the show today, and I want to welcome to Beyond the Culture, my guest today, Dr. Jocelynne Rainey. Welcome, Dr. Rainey.
Hi, thank you, Dr. David. I am so excited to be here with you today.
I am so excited of having you on the show today. And as I said in the introduction, the subject of incarceration is, it continues to be in the news. And as a matter of fact, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about it later, but it was even a part of the conversation with this recent election, criminal justice and criminal justice reform. So we'll talk some more about that later. But I want to just get into our conversation with you. But before I do, I want to not to, I would be remiss, being that you are a woman of color, I would be remiss in not asking you about this historic election of the first African-American woman being elected as vice president of the United States. So I just want to know, what are your thoughts about Kamala Harris being the vice president of the United States?
I so appreciate that question. Who would think in our lifetime that we would see two firsts, right? The first
Mm-hmm.
Black president, and now the first African American female vice president. And for me, it's just being able to say that there is someone who looks like me, that
Mm-hmm.
someone saw us. Even when you think about that moment when she had to tell the current vice president, I'm speaking. As
Yes, yes.
an American woman, you feel as though you're always in that struggle to be heard.
Mm-hmm.
You have this double minority thing going on, where you are always in a position where people are looking at you as though you're less than. So to see this woman who also had that strong personality that Black women are known for,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
this that she's going to be in this role is just so inspiring to me. And then bringing it further, she's my sorority sister.
Oh,
I'm a
wow.
of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. It is the first Black Greek organization, and we as well as all of the Divine Nine and all of the HBCUs. We really do tout excellence.
Mm-hmm.
So when you see someone who comes from the same cloth per se that you come from, and they're in that role, it makes you doubly proud. So as a woman, I have two sons. I don't have daughters. but I'm just like, I'm feeling really proud about, the fact that they're going to be young women who are going to say, I can do that. I can be that. So yeah, this is historic, and I'm excited to see what her and President-elect Biden do moving forward, especially for people of color.
Yeah, and what I love most about her is, as I was listening to people talk, she was someone who checked almost all the boxes, if not all the boxes.
Mm-hmm.
A woman, she was a Black woman, an Asian,
Asian
a,
American woman. Mm-hmm.
you know, and I just saw so many people, even around the world, found some way to connect with her.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
You went to an HBCU. We know HBCUs are excellent, but now everyone knows HBCUs are excellent. And I think that you're right. Like, there was just so many different connections for all of those who have been marginalized to say, wow, here's me. This is me. I could do this. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
So tell us about you. Give us your background so we can know who Dr. Jocelynne is.
Yeah. So, I was raised between Connecticut, New York, and Richmond. I was born in Richmond, Virginia, graduated from undergraduate school in Connecticut, went to Southern Connecticut State University, went on to earn my master's degree while I was raising a young son, received my master's degree from Metropolitan College in New York. And, just recently in 2018, finished my doctorate in executive leadership. And I always say the doctorate, the master's was really about, I never wanted a credential to stop me from having anything. I really thought that it was important at that point in my life that I had that credential. I always think the doctorate was somewhat of a vanity project. I had pretty much, moved along in my career, but I will say that the breadth of knowledge that I received going through that process and the growth that I went through as a human being during that time, I think it just made me a better person, and definitely made me a researcher, as I'm sure you are as well. I'm married. I have two sons who are two adult sons. My career, I started in nonprofit, and eventually I did move to the for-profit sector for a while. My background is operations and human resources primarily, but I've always liked to mix the two. My last role was with the Brooklyn Navy Yard before I came over to came over to Getting Out and Staying Out. I was at the Navy Yard. I had been there for 9 years. I was the chief administrative officer, overseeing quite a bit of the work, but was most passionate about workforce development, where I was able to connect people to jobs. And
Okay.
while doing that, realized that I wanted to run a nonprofit that was focused on equity for people of color,
Okay.
and particularly equity for Black men. That was what I wanted to focus on. So, moving over to Getting Out and Staying Out as the CEO and president was the perfect role for me, because we work with young men between the ages of 16 and 24. Many have been formerly incarcerated. Some have only had like some kinds of brushes with the law, but really understanding that, if we're able to help them to move on in their lives and to help them move into employment, education, and emotional well-being, that's going to change things not only for them, but for their families and for their communities. So that's a little bit of me in a brief.
So you brought up the organization that you work for, GOSO. That's how we say GOSO. I know it's Get Out,
GOSO,
Stay
yep.
Out. GOSO.
We call it GOSO. Yep.
Yeah. And so I found a quote from you on the website, and I just want you to kind of go a little bit deeper and just talk about this. And this is obviously the focus of the organization. It says reducing mass incarceration and creating a path to stability and success for disadvantaged young men is the issue of our time. GOSO levels the playing field for young men who have been in the justice system, who are disproportionately young men of color. This is essential to uplifting individuals, families, and communities, and making New York a fairer and more equitable city. So talk about that, because that seems to be the focus of the organization, and how is it working?
Yeah. So I so appreciate that you use that quote, right? Because I think that the word that I try to use often, I'm really like, I try to stay on message. And what I really thought about, this is really leveling the playing field, right? Like this is really creating equity,
Mm-hmm.
right? And because when you think about, the research shows, right? The research shows that Black communities are over policed. One. So there's more opportunities for young Black men to have interactions with police officers that are negative, that can result in arrest, can
Mm-hmm.
result in being jailed or incarcerated, right? So Black men are 5 times more likely. So 5 times more likely to be incarcerated, or to have a negative interaction with the police. So when you think about that, you have to think about like the work that we do is really about giving them opportunities after they've been disproportionately impacted by the criminal justice system. When you think about a country that has 2.2 million people incarcerated in this country, and that is a country with about 36% of the country right now, close to 40% are Black and Latino, Latinx people, but the jails are filled at 56% with Black and Latinx people.
Mm-hmm.
So when you think about that disproportionality and who's incarcerated and who's not incarcerated, right, and what they're incarcerated for, you have to think that once they've been through that system, which is a system that is going to cause trauma. If they didn't already come from trauma, because people from neighborhoods that are marginalized endure more trauma in general. So, and then you're adding on incarceration, which there's trauma around that, and then you're saying, okay, now I want you to be successful.
Mm.
You're leaving the jails or the prisons, oftentimes without ID. You need counseling. You need to find work. There's just so many things that you need in order to be successful. When I look at the young men that we serve, you're an educator, 16 to 24, they have the capacity to do anything with the
Mm.
right, with the
Yep.
right. And so I really feel like it's our role at GOSO in order to be able to give them the resources that they need to be successful, because we know that that mass incarceration of people of color is a real thing. And once they're in our program, we want to see them be successful. So in a country where there's about 60% recidivism, 60% of folks who've been incarcerated go back to be incarcerated,
Mm-hmm.
GOSO enjoys a 15% recidivism rate. Only
Wonderful.
15% of the young men that we serve go back to being jailed or in prison. And with that, the reason why that is because we are working with their emotional well-being. The majority of our staff are social workers, and their training and the work that they do with the young men around counseling and therapy is really helping them to have good emotional well-being, so they can be successful in employment and in education. We have a DOE program on our site, where the young men can get their high school equivalency diploma. We work with them to go to college if that's what they want to do. We have a vocational program where we help the young men that we serve to receive vocational certificates and flagging and fire watch, security, anything that they want to receive a certificate in. We help them to get those ID documents that they need right away. We pay for that, through our funding. And then we also have a workforce development program where we also help the young men to get to get jobs, and to get jobs that lead to careers. And we do that by also having a job readiness program that prepares them for what it's like to be in a workplace. We have an internship program where we pay the young men to participate in internships with our employer partners. And one of the things I love about it is like GOSO feels like home. When I went there for the first time and I saw young guys my kids' age, going into the refrigerator, making a sandwich, they were bantering with each other, like giving them that place to be who they were meant to be, is what GOSO is, while still giving them the resources to help them be successful long term. So this is really about understanding that there is this crossroads between racial justice and criminal justice. And we can't have one conversation without having the other conversation. We can't say that people are put in jail, are having interactions with police, without also talking about what's happening around race in this country, and how people of color are overly impacted by the criminal justice system.
You know, you are absolutely right. The statistics do show that Black males are far more incarcerated than any other ethnic group or gender. But I want to ask you this question. How did you get involved? What was, with the formerly incarcerated and young men, what was your motivation? What
Yeah.
motivated you to get involved with that?
It's really interesting. I wish I could say like this has been my life's work, right?
Okay.
When I was an undergrad, I did major in criminal justice, and I did intern for probation, and we did go to jails to do pre-sentence investigations. And I would be extremely awed by how amazing the young men were that I was meeting during that time. But that's not the course my career took, right? That's not the course my career took. I think that, what brought me to this work is that I was really focused on leading an organization that was focused on equity and closing the and closing the wage gap. I really feel strongly, this huge wage gap between Black families and white families is something that honestly keeps me up at night, right? Wondering, how are my kids going to survive if they're anticipating that one day Black people will have zero wealth, right? Right now, white families' wealth is over 100% more than Black families' wealth, right? So what does that mean for us? And it was really like, I'm at a point in my life where, I want to be part of that solution. And, understanding that the way that you close the wealth gap is by connecting people to gainful employment, where they can learn how to acquire and amass wealth, right? That's really important. And so for me, it was really about, I want to take all my expertise and all my learning and invest in how do I now help these young men that are just starting out, honestly, right? Like they're young. How do I help them to be connected in a meaningful way to the labor market? And the only way you're connected in a meaningful way to the labor market is if you have the resources and the tools that you need to be successful, and that you have the education that you need to be successful. And so this role for me just spoke to everything that I am. Like, this spoke to, this is the population that we need to invest in order to make sure that we're closing that wealth gap for generations to come.
That's a great insight that you have, especially understanding that after you come out of jail, you got to get a job.
Exactly.
Exactly. And here's something that just jumped out at me while you were talking. If you don't get a job, chances are you're going back in.
Exactly. And you need supports while you're trying to prepare for that job, right?
Right.
Immediately prepared to go into work after being incarcerated. You might not be, immediately prepared to go into work after you've been incarcerated. So what kind of supports do you need in order to get to that point, right? So you need Metro cards. Right? You need to be able to have, someplace where you can get a meal, which we do, right? You need to have support if you have housing instability to help you to find housing, because we know instability in any area of your life is going to bring instability in every area of your life. So GOSO does all those wraparound services in order to support you while you're getting what you need in order to get into a job, whether that be getting the education, the high school diploma, or going further and getting the college degree, or whether that means just getting a vocational certificate. or finding a job immediately that fits your skill set. But GOSO is there to help you the whole way, not just say, okay, you're gonna leave Rikers, or you're gonna leave an upstate prison, and boom, we're gonna put you in a job without any supports. It's really, like you said, it's all about like, how do you do those wraparound services to support someone while they're getting to that point of being ready for whatever gainful employment means for them.
You know, I brought up the uh, Kamala Harris earlier in the conversation, and obviously you can't have a Kamala Harris without a Joe Biden.
Right.
So we have as of January 2021, we're going to have a new administration. And I want to ask you, how do you see the current administration, the new administration, working with the criminal justice system? Do you think that they have the right action plan for this time? And how will they help Black people?
I mean, I don't know that anyone has the right action plan yet for this time. I think that the fact that we're having these conversations is a good start, right?
Okay.
But I think that the action plan, when we talk about, defunding the police, or we talk about, no more jails or no more prisons, I think that we're just not really having the deeper conversation. From my own perspective, it's like, it's not about defunding the police. It's about changing policing. Like, what is policing, right? And I don't think that it's about that individual police officer. It's about the culture and the expectation. It's also about having police officers who come from the communities that they're policing. Like, you and I were raised in New York City, and New York City, doesn't matter what socioeconomic level you come from. It doesn't matter if you're middle class or you're not. It's like, you've been exposed to New York City, right? Like, I'm sure we've all had friends all across New York City, across all socioeconomic levels, right? So I think that that's one thing. It's like making sure that you're creating a way to have a pipeline of police officers who come from the communities that they serve. And that's really important. And that's something that I want to talk more about in general as I talk about this work across like all areas. Then the other thing I think about is like, prisons. I don't know if I feel like you should abolish prisons, but I don't know if you should call them prisons, one. And secondly, I think that if you're sending people into prisons and you're not helping them with the needs that they have that brought them there, then you're not doing anything better for society, right? Like, if you're just taking someone in and you're just thinking that this is a punitive thing, like, I'm going to make you be scared that you're going to be in prison, instead of thinking about, well, what's driving you to do this? What can we give you? What kind of counseling? What kind of help? What kind of skill building can we do to help you to get a job? So you don't, but so if we're not doing those pieces of it, then I don't know that we're having the full conversation. So I'm really excited about bail reform. I think it's right? Like, I don't think anyone should sit in jail for longer than anyone else just because they can't get bail, right? I think that's a great starting point, and I think that it needs to be maintained, and people need to fight for that, because if we don't, then we can go backwards to where, young people are being kept in jail because their parents don't have the money to pay bail, and they're being kept in jail for minor crimes. And so that's an issue. So I think that's a great starting point, but I think there's a lot of work to be done in prisons and in policing and those cultures in order to really do real change.
I'm going to ask you something. And I always tell people, be careful what you put out on video because it'll stay out there forever. And I happened to come across a video that you were on, and this is what you said, and I want to ask you about it. You said that you are a fourth generation college graduate, but all the Black men in your life, your father, your husband, and your sons, have been touched negatively by the criminal justice system. I want you to talk about that and explain it, because I do want to get some clarity whether or not they've been involved with the criminal justice system, or are there scenarios where, driving while black, or, stop and frisk? But I know you said that they all have been negatively affected by the criminal justice system. So talk to that for me.
I believe that, in some ways we all know that, being Black is sometimes criminalized, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think my point is really that I'm no different than any other Black. My lived experience is the same lived experience as other Black women who might not come from the same background that I come from, right? I still go to bed every night afraid that my sons are going to be stopped by the police, right? So I have the same fears, and I've seen it happen. I think for all of for my father, my sons, and my husband, I thought about this recently. It's like all of them have been impacted. And I will say that no, it wasn't driving while black. It was literally like being stopped by the police, as much as, being arrested, or, going. And I think in situations where I feel that if they were white middle class, and I've had white middle class people tell me stories of things that have happened to them that were very similar to the same things that my sons, my husband went through, and my father, where they were just like, oh, go straight home, or, don't do that, I'm gonna call your mother. Now I will say, I did have an instance with my youngest son where he was in high school, and something happened, and the police officer called me up and talked.
Okay.
And I thought, so that's what I mean. That's why I don't think that police are bad, right? I think
Right.
that, something around policing. So I do want to say that I've had that positive interaction
Mm-hmm.
with a police officer. But I will say that I've also, every instance has been, and these are their stories, has been an instance where I have had conversations with white colleagues where they said like, oh yeah, I was told, that's okay. And I don't know if you remember, I was reading, I was with George Floyd. I was reading an article about someone who said that he had the same exact incident happen where he had a counterfeit bill. Now, I don't know the extent of it, and I don't want to say that I know,
Mm-hmm.
all the nuance of it and how it, but he said, it's a story I get to laugh about, and he's not here anymore, right? And
Wow.
so I think that that's what it is. It's like, if a community is over policed, then there's going to be more instances of them being impacted negatively by the police, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're over policed.
Yeah, and I do agree with you that not all police are bad.
No.
Um, I didn't like the language of defund the police. I really didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Because I remember saying to someone when I first heard it, I'm like, what? Because it was saying to me, get rid of the police and stuff like that. And I said, no, we need the police, because there's sometimes when you have to call a police officer. And I said, even though they tried to explain defunding the police, I said, oh, okay, I got it. Now I understand what you mean. But people on the other side are going to take the message the way they want to take it and use it, to their advantage.
Yep.
Which was very sad. But yeah, so I do understand that, and yes, when you are African American, there are so many opportunities, if that's the right word, where you're going to engage law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of times, I think you said earlier that we all have a bias.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think the police have a bias. And I'm going to be honest with you. I think we have a bias up towards them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of times, if you get pulled over, there's some people who automatically think that you're getting pulled over because of your race. And then sometimes things get out of control. So, but I'm just trying to say that you're right. Sometimes encounters with the police can go negative. And but we got to find a place to, as Rodney King said, get along.
Yep.
Because otherwise, we're losing too many Black men in these encounters.
And we need to really, and I think that goes back to policing in the community where you live, right? Like,
Yes, absolutely.
Feel comfortable, I think a lot of things might happen just out of fear. I think investing in policing and what policing should look like, and when should you police, and how should you police, and I think that that's something that, we need to talk a little bit more about is like, how do you invest in policing? Not maybe not to fund it, but I do think that some of the funding should go to organizations that do credible messaging, right? So
Mhm.
at GOSA, we have a SAVE team called, the SAVE team is Stand Against Violence East Harlem. And that whole team is credible messengers, people who are from the community, they're from the housing complexes where they work. They know the community, they know families, and they're able to, for lack of a better word, squash beef right there because people respect them and know who they
Yes.
are, right?
Mhm.
So I think that obviously you can do this work without doing it in a way that it makes people feel like, you know what, that they have to be afraid of you or you're afraid of them. So I think that there is something there around taking some of the funding from policing and investing more in credible messengers, right? Because I know that the people who work on our SAVE team can go into the community and they know like Michael's brother or Michelle's sister or their mother, and they know them and they can sit there and they can mediate something that happened. And I think that also around policing is if they're trained to go to brute force,
Mhm.
then that's also an issue, right? Like if you're trained to go to brute force, if you're afraid or you don't feel comfortable in a community, that might be where you go so you feel safe sooner, right?
Mhm.
Like, so I can feel safe sooner. So I think that that's part of it. And also I think there needs to be more long-term training for police if they're going to be policing. And I don't think it's all, like you said, we all have biases. The issue with biases is that we don't always have the power to execute on our biases. They
Right.
have the power to execute on their biases. So I don't know how I feel about implicit bias training. I mean, I'm an HR person by design. I think that implicit bias is real. I think though that the real thing though is putting in practices and policies and regulations so people don't make those mistakes, right? So they can't act on their biases. Like,
Mhm.
so I think that it's really important to put in those practices, policies, and regulations that help to make sure those things don't happen. So yeah, I think to fund the police is really about funding other work that could help as well, like maybe funding more mental health training, right? Like understand, doing more mental health training so that when someone is having an episode, you know how to deal with that. But yeah, so I think there is some. I think sometimes there's a, like I do believe there's over policing, and I do believe there's some areas of policing that could be that where we could reallocate funding towards some other piece of it.
I had a guest on the show recently, and she's a mutual acquaintance of ours, Jennifer Jones Austin,
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know Jennifer.
and she left us with a quote, and I want to ask you about it. She said, "In our society, there are three inextricably linked. There are three that are inextricably linked. That's race, poverty, and justice involvement, and they
Yep.
go hand in hand."
Mhm.
Do you agree with that statement? And if you do, is there anything you want to add to that?
I agree with it wholeheartedly. I think that, race and poverty are criminalized, right?
Okay.
Like being poor is criminalized. I think that, race is criminalized. Like if you're Black and you feel like immediately you have to justify who you are in order to feel safe, right? Because it's just because of the color of your skin. I think that, there's a lot of work to be done in order to undo that linkage between the three, right? There's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of work. So when you're thinking, when someone is, again, and that's my issue with prisons, is that if someone is committing a crime because they're hungry, what are we doing to help them so that they're not hungry, right? If someone is, and committing a crime because what, they can't afford their rent or they're without housing, what are we doing to correct those things, right? So I think that and then you also think about in communities that there's more poverty, schools are under resourced,
Mm.
so you're not only dealing with race, poverty, and the criminal justice system, it also has a lot to do with the education system, right? And that you're not getting the resources that you need in school in order to be as successful as you can be. So I think that there's just so much work to be done at its core around race, poverty, and education that really does impact the criminal justice system. And that pipeline, that pipeline to prison is
Mm,
is real, right? Like, if and what's going to happen after this? I mean, just to get off a little off track, like, what's going to have to happen after this pandemic with all these children who can't get educated because they live in homeless shelters or they don't have
wow.
technology that they need? What's going to happen to those children? So, there's a lot of work to be done. And I think that we're getting there. We're understanding things like the digital divide. I'm really proud of the city for making sure that young people have technology. We need more.
Okay.
Um, we need more internet bandwidth so people can get educated. We're struggling with it at GOSO. Our participants don't have the technology they need in order to participate in all of our programming. Um, but we're able to provide that. Our funders understood that as a real need, and we're able to fund laptops and phones and hotspots. They need hotspots because the
Mhm.
internet, the bandwidth isn't great. Um, so yeah, I completely agree with Jennifer, and I think that it's so important to always have those conversations and make sure that we're talking about all of it, because it's all intertwined and it's all the same issue.
Um, you've done a lot of great things, done a lot of great work. I want to ask you this question. I always ask my guests this question. With all the work that you've done, are there any regrets or disappointments about something that you were not able to get done?
Wow. Yeah, there's always um, regrets or disappointments. I think that, I'm going to go back a bit. I think that, I wish I had the knowledge that I have now when I was younger and I was a younger leader, right? Because as a younger leader, I was very much strictly by the book, and sometimes I was the problem, right? Because I was going by the policy or the procedure instead of understanding the whole person and what their experience is. And it might have a little bit to do with who I am today and how I go about my work now. People of color are receive much harsher performance reviews. They are terminated more often from jobs. All of this it bears out in the research. And I think that I've been guilty of that in my younger years, of not always being the advocate or the person to say, like, wait, is that fair? Is that right? Do we treat them the same way? I mean, I've been that person for a while now, but I do look back at my career and say, there were times when I was in leadership positions where if the policy said ABC and you did ABC, I say, okay, you know what? I'm going to hold you accountable to that, instead of really understanding, what was going on, and were we holding everyone accountable to ABC.
So as we get ready to bring this conversation to a close, and I mean, this is truly outstanding. I want to know whether or not, what advice would you give someone who wanted to become involved with the formerly incarcerated? Advice would you give them?
I would tell them to do it. I would tell them that, what, it is so important for all of us to invest in this talent, right? This is talent that we're losing in America. America is probably behind other countries because we have so much talent in jails. Like, we have the most people incarcerated, right? And you were talking about great books. I highly recommend Incarceration Nation by Boz Dressinger, and talking about incarceration across the world and what it looks like. And in America, we have the most incarcerated. And it's bad everywhere, but it's a beautiful book that really gives you real insight into, what the lost talent that we're the talent that we've lost because of incarceration. And she talks about the brilliant minds that she's met during incarceration. So I think that one thing I would say is to always think about this as, no one should be penalized forever for their worst deed, that we need to invest in those people, and we need to help them. And so there's ways to, if you're already doing something else, there's ways to volunteer with GOSO. You can always reach out to us at gettingoutandsstayingout.org to learn about our volunteer opportunities. I am always interested in folks who would like to come help our participants around interviews and public speaking and resume writing. There's also opportunities to donate or to donate money, but also to donate goods and services as well. So I would say that if, depending on, where you'd want to start in working with people who have been formerly incarcerated, I would say, do your research, but we're always an option if that's something that folks are interested in.
Can you give us that social media information again, a website information?
So gettingoutandstayingout.org. I'm sorry, GOSO. Oh, I did this. GOSO.org is our website. And we're also on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn.
Great. And I just want to close. I want to ask you just one more thing. I just want to close with you just giving us a message of inspiration.
I think that the message of inspiration I would say is that, do what you love. It's so important to do what you love. If you love what you do, I know this is like an old thing, like it'll never feel like work, but I feel like, if you love what you do, you're going to make a much bigger impact in the world, and you're going to be able to make an impact in a way that's going to be fulfilling to you. And I have to say that my career has been guided by me doing what I love. And I've been able to enjoy a really fruitful existence, because once I understood what I wanted to do as a person and the two intersected, I've been successful. So philanthropy is important to me as a person. Equity for people of color is important to me as a person. And, I've been able to do that in my personal and my professional life. And I've been able to impact more lives that way. So that's what I would say. Do what you love and love yourself.
Yes, absolutely. That was some great advice. Do what you love and love yourself. Because if you love yourself, you'll do what you love, right?
Do what you love. You'll believe in yourself.
Absolutely.
Yep.
I want to thank my guest today, Dr. Jocelynne Rainey, for coming on the show and inspiring us and informing us about this very important subject of young men, Black men primarily, of being incarcerated. And you've let us know that there is hope, that, and as you said a few minutes ago, you're not about your worst deed. You're not as bad as your worst deed. There's always hope. There's opportunity. There's time to recover. But all you need is somebody to care about you.
Exactly. And invest in you.
And that's what you do. And so I'm appreciative of you. I'm sure the many young men and their families who you have helped are appreciative of you. And as I say to all my guests who come on the show, you have gone beyond the culture, and I thank you tremendously.
Thank you, Dr. David. Thank you.
All right. And you take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Now, if you want to continue to hear inspiring interviews like the one you heard today, I want you to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes. Also, rate the show and please leave a comment. I would also love it if you would share this podcast with your friends to let them know that we're on. Finally, please go to our website at www.beyondtheculturepodcast.com, or you can email me at beyondtheculturepodcast@gmail.com. On the website, you can subscribe to the show and connect with me by leaving your email address. I'd love to hear from you. This is your host, Dr. David Walker, and we'll talk again on Beyond the Culture. Take care.